Alfonso Delgado. I'm the Assistant Director for Unincorporated Areas. Before we get started, I do want to ask y'all if you could put in the chat what community you're coming from. Give it a couple minutes, but welcome. This is going to be our presentation around governance change and what uh, they mean to you. And we are focusing around the unincorporated communities of SD2 for today's presentation. I'll give it some time. El Camino Village, cool. I see East Gardena, West Rancho, perfect. Willowbrook, Baldwin Hills, Crenshaw. And I know there's some city folks that signed up from other cities, unincorporated. But thank you all. Still welcome to be in this meeting. As I mentioned, I'm Alfonso Delgado, Assistant Director for Unincorporated Areas. My team does focus on municipal improvements for unincorporated areas and overall quality of life for UAs and how do we better improve county services for our UAs. And then we have Jonathan Yang. You want to introduce yourself? Quick.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. I'm Jonathan Yang. I'm Supervisor, Senior Deputy for Legal Affairs and also real estate. But for tonight's purposes, legal affairs is the relevant part. So I'm one of our leads on all these governance-related changes that are coming as a result of Measure G. And so, yeah, looking forward to sharing all of that with you tonight. And as Alfonso said, while our focus tonight is on the impact on incorporated areas, I think regardless of where you're from, this will hopefully be useful information for you, and there will ultimately be an impact on everyone who lives in LA County one way or another. So looking forward to getting into that with you all.
All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So for today's agenda, we're going to go over your county government, just a quick overview. And if some of you have attended our Let's Chat for a second, we do a really in dive on that, but we'll go a brief review over that. We'll go over overview of Measure G. That will be my colleague Jonathan doing that. Then we'll go into a little bit of let's hear from you, group survey. Then we'll go into ways to get involved with the governance reform task force, and then ways to stay engaged with our team. So your county government. So next slide. Um, specifically for unincorporated areas, your county government provides most of the municipal service. So we're talking about street lighting, trash pickup, our DAC, fire, sheriff, and so on. Those are our basic services that we provide. Overall, the county does focus around how the supervisor likes to say, we do our social services to the community. So we're talking about our DPSS, our health, our DMH department. So a lot of our uh, state mandated programs. But overall, that's for the unincorporated communities, we do become your de facto city. We provide the municipal services. The board is composed of 5 members, 5-member supervisor. We have the legislative and policy and ordinance power, overseeing appointments of department heads and approving the budget. And then we also right now currently do appoint the chief executive office. And this is very important. These as a moment, and we'll go into later on with Measure G on how that changes.
I'll take it over from here, and just to flag the obvious, right, for in case folks just super clear where we're coming along, right? The map that was on the slide that Alfonso just presented, that is the second district. That's the office we work for, Supervisor Mitchell, who covers that's 1 out of the 5 of the Kern County Board of Supervisors. So now let's talk about Measure G, which voters passed in 2024, which is going to make a lot of pretty fundamental, unprecedented changes to county government. You know, as Alfonso said, currently the Board of Supervisors collectively as 5, and they take a vote to make decisions about what to do, collectively runs the county, right? Both the executive branch, legislative branch, if you remember that all from from Schoolhouse Rock. With Measure G now, that changed the charter, which is like the constitution for the county. And so the first time starting in 2028, voters will directly elect a brand new position called the county executive that's going to direct the day-to-day county operations, including managing the county departments, appointing, removing department heads, drafting the budget. We'll go into more of that later on. That all happens in 2028. And along with that, the board once it becomes, the board will stick around, but it'll just become the legislative branch, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. We'll also have a new county legislative analyst that supports its legislative work. So that's going to report to the board and kind of help it do its policymaking. What you also may have heard about is expansion of the board from 5 to 9 supervisors, right? And so that'll happen after the 2030 census, where we're going to redraw the lines. So, right, because to go from 5 to 9, you have to redraw all the districts, but that expansion won't happen until 2032. So, first, 2028, you all, voters of LA County, will have the opportunity to elect a county executive who will start in December of that year, 2028. And then for about 4 years, there's going to be overlap with the county executive and 5 members of board, and then that's going to go to 9. There are other changes that are in Measure G. We could spend lots of time walking through all those, but it's not the focus of tonight's discussion. But just briefly, Measure G will set up an independent ethics, sets up an independent ethics commission. As it also requires departments to present their budgets in a public hearing. And then it also sets up a charter review commission every 10 years. So basically every 10 years looking at whether we should make big changes, big or small changes, like the ones we're talking about tonight in the county charter. Let's move on to the next slide. So let's unpack the county executive piece, because that's really the part that's the biggest change from how the county works now. Going from 5 to 9 supervisors, it's expanding the board, it expands the board, but that on its own is not as big of a change because it's just adding more people, but the county would be running the way it does now. But Measure G does something bigger and more fundamental, which is it separates the executive branch from the legislative branch, right? It separates the board, which will continue to do what it does now, which is makes the rules and the policies, right? And says, but now we'll have an elected county executive who will take over the actual implementation day to day of what that means. So the county will say, this is what, our health policy should be. And then the county executive, like a mayor or governor, is going to oversee the day-to-day operations, the implementation, like a mayor, and hire and fire department heads. We'll also have the ability to veto some of that board legislation, which the board can override, but basically vetoing saying even if the board passes now an ordinance or policy or something, county executive could override that, or could veto that, right, and not approve it unless the board, by an even higher vote, overrides it. The county executive will prepare the annual budget, right, and submit that draft to the board, who's going to analyze it and discuss it, might make amendments, and ultimately approve it. County executive also initiates, coordinates, and directs emergency and disaster response, and also leads labor negotiation, right? So we've got 100,000 county employees, majority of which are in unions. So that's actually a really important role too in terms of ultimately managing the county's budget, right? Because the number one thing we spend money on is the cost of paying people to do the hard work of actually implementing our county services. So all of that is to say that this coming county executive and this change in how the county is organized is going to play a major role in shaping how municipal services are delivered to unincorporated areas, as well as many other things about how the county runs. But again, going back to what the county government is now, right now, if you live in one of our many unincorporated areas, the county is your municipal government, right? If you've got if you need, if you're have an issue with how your trash is being picked up or how your street's being paved or any number of other typical local government issues, you'll come to the county supervisor's office, our office, if you're in our district, and we, as both the executive and the legislative, will deal with county departments and push them to address those issues. Come 2028, the county executive now will be the entity, the person who hires and fires the department heads, directs day-to-day operations, and so that changes significantly, potentially how certain, you pick up the phone and you have an issue with trash pickup, who do you call, and on that from your end, and then internally to the county, how is that all going to be sorted out to make sure you get those services? So that leads us to the next slide. So these are some big fundamental questions, and Measure G in 2024 on the ballot did not answer these questions, right? It separated the government entities. It created this whole new super powerful county executive, but it doesn't actually answer these questions of who is ultimately responsible for municipal services in the corporate areas. What role will the supervisor have for that area? when the county executive directs departmental operations. For those of you who are familiar with how any city runs, city of LA or even the smaller cities, you've got council members who each represent an area if there's districts, and then you have a mayor, city manager, and depending on the city, there it can be different relationships for how involved or how much power the city council member has, even if you call your council member, their ability to make a department do something, right? And so that's an open question that has not been answered. We also have the question of how the elected county executive, which will be directing day-to-day operations, but will now, the supervisor districts right now are 2 million people. And as some of you may have experienced, we try our best, but that ratio, it's a tough one, right? Of having to deal with folks from 2 million people raising issues to you. Now the county executive is going to be countywide, so 10 plus million people. How do we make sure that that county executive is responsive when someone in some relatively small unincorporated area is trying to get that county executive to address their issues? So these are big questions, and part of our goal in bringing this information to you tonight, and we'll talk about the process for how these questions are going to get answered. That's a process that's undergoing, and that we'll come back to that later tonight when we talk about the governance reform task force. But part of our goal is to raise for your awareness some of these issues that are coming so that you and then inform you and empower you to raise the issues that are of importance to you so that the folks who are in charge of answering these big questions answer those questions with your concerns in mind and with some better idea of like what are the actual challenges you all experience so that we collectively can shape shape this new county structure to try to better serve you and better address those. So with that, let me hand it back to Alfonso, who's going to lead us through a discussion about what some of those issues might be.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that, for the transition. For the next slide in this process, we are going to ask you to answer this question, which is what challenges have you experienced living in an unincorporated area? You can either scan here for the survey, and we will share the link on chat. You can also put your answers on the chat. For now, we'll give about 5 minutes, roughly. It's 6:18. 22, 23, so like 6:23 we'll come back. We'll let we'll process the questions. So take your time. And if you're coming from a city, you can also put how the county has impacted you in different ways, because the county does do other services that help cities, like now with the new homeless department, and then thinking about how DPH and DMH do services to that. Decrease access to emergency. I see here, listen, Watson said, decrease access to emergency services. On the link, someone just put lack of coordination or efficiency delivery of services. Some other responses, or some from a comment: homeless encampment on public property, landscaping maintenance not well maintained. You can also put your concerns or experience on the chat as well. Programs for schools, age development, disability, trash on major streets. Concerns about apartment buildings allowed with almost no parking. Give it one more minute. Now we'll go to the next slide. Here, DPH inspection for health-related housing repair issues, even for the city of LA. Not enough participation in local measures. Roads and infrastructure, parking, more businesses, very nasty around MLK Community Hospital. Historic deterrents on Broadway, 157. Access to healthy food. All right, we're already at 6:22. Thank you all for sharing those. And we'll go to the next slide because these are all, some of them are things that we've already been working on here and with the unincorporated areas team. As a lot of you have mentioned, there's just putting all of the comments together that I saw in the chat and what is being populated in the survey question, and survey that was answered. So for us, we have determined some of the municipal services are not well coordinated when it comes to multiple issues. Representation, that's always been when I mean representation, it's one supervisor covers 2 million people. Is is that enough? Even with the expansion, data, we have limited access to data dashboards on services and how they're being provided to unincorporated areas. No dedicated funding, and for this one, I want to be a little bit more clear because there is certain funding that's specifically for unincorporated areas, but we have other shared resources where multiple UAs are sharing multiple fire departments, fire stations, or um, sheriff stations are being shared between one patrol for two unincorporated areas. We see this with animal care services. So a lot of the services that are provided are shared between multiple UAs. Regional approach, when we try to fix concerns, we have to address it in a regional approach because any motions that have come through to address these issues impact the whole county and all the unincorporated, not just in Super Service District 2. And then equity. Historically, underserved constituents have not been engaged or afforded the representation they deserve. So these are all things that we have thought about. It's things that we're currently working, but we also these are issues and questions we should be asking at the GRTF, and Jonathan will get more into details to that process right now.
All right, so back to now diving into where we go from here in connecting these issues that you all shared with the big changes that are coming to county government. So let me talk to you about the Governance Reform Task Force. So this is a body whose work is current ongoing. They're working hard. Who's tasked through Measure G with making recommendations to implement Measure G. So when we talk about some of these big questions that we emphasized earlier, this is the group that is going to have the at least who's day to day going to have the first responsibility does have the first responsibility for coming up with recommendations on how to answer those questions. Now these recommendations are advisory, so the way it works is the task force discusses. They have public meetings every 2 weeks, and we'll talk more about that in just a bit. Then they deliberate, and have representatives from all across the county in all sorts of different sectors and backgrounds, and they come up with recommendations. For example, we expect them to come up with like a recommendation on how municipal services should be delivered and what detailed structures would help ensure that a constituent in an unincorporated area has better, more responsive services when to clarify who they should pick up the phone and call, and then on the back end, making sure that whoever it is that you call actually is the right person, is given the right responsibilities, has the right communication channels with the to deliver those services. I see a question about how the members of the GRTF were selected. So, with this is to briefly summarize, and and all of this is public in terms of how it was done. There's a board motion from November 2024 that spells out. November of 2024 that spells out this process. But basically, each member of the board of supervisors, each appointed one member. So that's five. As well as part of the task force structure, there are three representatives for organized labor for our worker unions, labor unions, given the massive impact this will likely have on the workforce, right, in terms of restructuring where people work and how that goes. That's three, and then the first five, the ones appointed by the board, collectively ran a public process. People applied. There was a requirement that at least two people on the entire task force were residents of an incorporated area, and so the first five ran a public process, public application, and ultimately selected and chose the remaining five, including to make sure there was representation from additional other sectors, right? Folks with experience in municipal government, folks with experience in public policy, with community outreach, et cetera, et cetera. But if you go to the Governance Reform Task Force website, which we'll share actually on a following slide. Let's not go to that yet. Let me keep talking to the task force. I'm just answering the question, but you'll see that's the website. You can see the pictures and names of all the task force members. So going back to the process, so they come up with these recommendations, they send it to the board. The board ultimately decides whether, a lot of these changes will have to be spelled out by ordinance or board policy, right? Saying, right, how should municipal services be set up, right? If we have to create a new department, that obviously that's something that the board would have to consider and adopt, and be a lot of decisions that come out of that. If it's changing policies, the board would have to decide on that. So far, the recommendations that have come to the board have been related to first the budget hearing process, right, and just clarifying the details there. I mentioned earlier that now each department presents their budget publicly in a hearing, which is without getting into the weeds, because I think we can talk about this more if there's interest in it, but I'm mostly just describing it as an example. And then their most recent set of recommendations that the board adopted were for the Ethics Commission. And just briefly on that, those were basically things to put into the charter to make sure that the Ethics Commission can be more independent from the other elected officials, with the idea that, okay, because the Ethics Commission is responsible for policing, for regulating the conduct of elected officials at the county, there should be some more separation between the two. And so that actually, they made a recommendation for a charter amendment to change some things in the charter. The board approved that, so that will actually be on your November ballot for the Ethics Commission. So that's an example of how the process has worked so far now. Now they're turning to making recommendations for the structure of the new elected county executive, which is this whole new job that we've been talking about. And so we would expect, we actually don't even know yet, because part of the goal was for the task force to work with some to go out into the community, and also not just be dictated by any of our offices of the current board, right? And so we are also in some ways waiting to see what their detailed recommendations will be, but it will be likely, right, in order for any of this to have the force of law and be enforced, is some version of like an ordinance or sort of board policies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now let's go to the next slide. So in terms of answering those big questions, right now the first step is the governance reform task force coming up with their answers to those questions through these public meetings, as well as their own committee meetings. And that's a space where they are very open to public comment, both written. So you can do these are public meetings, and if you go to the website, you'll see their agendas, their schedule for the rest of the year, right, in terms of, and actually going into next year, about where their meetings are going to be. But there's also always a virtual participation option. You'll have the agendas, and a couple days beforehand, you'll be able to see, the PowerPoints that are going to be discussed, reports that they're going to be reviewing. You can see what it is that they'll be talking about. These meetings are usually in the evenings, although we'll talk about schedule on the next slide. And yeah, so if you go to this meeting, you can follow along. You can also see reports that have been shared, that have been commissioned by the task force, or reports that they've sent to the board, right, as part of their recommendations. So you can see all the materials about what it is that they're considering. So, and they are eager to hear from you. And when I say you, I do mean everyone on this call, about how county government can be improved, including making it more effective, responsive, and accountable. So you can go in person, you can call in, you can also submit email written comments if you're not able to make the times of the meetings, to comments@measuredg.lacounty.gov. When you look at the agendas for their meetings, that information about how to participate, including what number to call if you want to call in, will be on those agendas. So again, go back to the website, which you can access by this QR code. And the goal is, or one basic thing is, to uplift for them all the different ways that people who rely on the county for services actually experience challenges, experience those services, right? Because no matter how much experience these task force members have, and they have significant experience in a lot of different areas, they may not know they won't have the breadth of experience that everyone on this call could share, right? And so we want to welcome and invite you all, having told you about how important these discussions are, and how these discussions and answering those big questions could impact you, to share your experiences about what is or is not working with the county and what could be done better. So that's the baseline thing. I'll also say, having been like all of us in our office, on the receiving end, and I think the task force is no different, their goal is ultimately making recommendations about the governance structure, right? About like what office, should there be an office of this? Should there be a department of this? What should the county executive be responsible for? What should the supervisor's office be responsible for? How should they work together? So that's ultimately the lever they have. And so, for example, and just to compare and contrast, if you have a complaint or an issue with like a specific county employee, you say, I don't like how John Smith does their job. That's not necessarily something the task force will directly be able to respond to. However, if you're looking at and saying like, oh, it's not just that I don't like John Smith. My experience with John Smith in X department points to a bigger problem, a more fundamental problem with how the county is structured, including, hey, if I make a complaint about a county employee, it's not clear where that goes or how that gets followed up on. That is a structural issue that then the task force could actually come up with something to address and include when they make their recommendations to the board. So the more you identify, as you're making your comment, how the governance structure is affecting the issues that you're experiencing, the more likely it's just, help them help you, right? The more likely the task force will be able to use your input and have that reflected into something that when it comes to the board and ultimately gets enacted, will ultimately come back and be able to address the issues that you're talking about. So let's go to the next slide. So now let's talk about the upcoming task force meetings. And this schedule is actually unusually packed. So typically, the regular schedule is every 2 weeks. And they've been moving around the county. And part of the impetus for us scheduling this meeting and thinking about how to engage all of you is that on August 12th, 26th, and then again on September 23rd, those bolded locations, the task force will be having in-person meetings in our district. So Seed School of Los Angeles County is at the intersection of Vermont and Manchester in South LA, and the Lundquist Institute is on the campus of Harbor UCLA Medical Center, which is in unincorporated West Carson, in the more in the southern end of our district. And so those are in-person meetings, the regular meetings, right? But that where you have an opportunity to give your comment on the issues we've been talking about. You'll notice on this chart there's a bunch of other meetings, and why that is let's start with down near the bottom, September 9th. That regular meeting is their target to vote on their initial set of recommendations for the county executive. I say initial, they'll say initial, because this is, as you can probably tell from our meeting, like this is a huge topic and a lot of stuff. There are a lot of these big questions. The big questions I put on that slide are really the ones for tonight. They're not even all the big, like there's many other big questions that have to be sorted out. And so it's not that September 9th is the one and done, but September 9th is where they're going to send their first batch, is when they're targeting to send their first batch of recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. Again, like on ethics, like on budget hearings, it's going to be more detailed saying, hey, this particular piece of the county executive, it should look like this. And whether that requires a ordinance, board policy, whatever that, or whatever that is, that's their first self-imposed deadline for when they're going to send us stuff. So that means that the meetings leading up to that are going to be where they're really digging into the meat of considering what is it that they're going to include in that first package. There was a question and by the way, I said first package. There's a question in the chat about, when does the outreach quote unquote end? The task force is continuing to meet and work its way through all of these big questions for years to come, right? But this September 9th around there, and this is a self-imposed deadline, so it could slip. That's when they're planning to send their work to us. And so we want to put on your radar that this public process is happening, because quite frankly, not a lot of people are calling into these meetings. And so I can just tell you, they are not hearing from probably issues that folks on this call would raise, because nobody's calling in. I shouldn't say nobody. Not a lot of people are calling in. Now, let me go back to then these other meetings. Because of the September 9th deadline, they've scheduled a bunch of special meetings, which unfortunately are during the workday. And so for a lot of people, I get, that may be a challenge for you, which is why there's the written comment option. But just so that you know about it, August 7th, 17th, 21st, and 28th are additional special meetings where they're going to do more deep dives on the county executive. So as you can see, for the next month or so, this is a big topic for them. And we want to make sure that the issues that you bring to our office, the task force is also aware of, because it's, they're going to have the first crack at thinking about and making recommendations that they then send to us on how to address some of those issues. So that's the upcoming task force meetings. The slide before, right, is how you get involved. That's our overall goal, is to have you be aware of these opportunities to provide your input, and so that they can ultimately hear from you. I think before we move off of, because I think there are a few more slides on like generally staying engaged, but if we can open up for, I think we can open up if folks have questions, because I know we've presented a lot of information tonight, and I think folks can use the raise hand feature, and we can go through and take questions, or if folks aren't able to, yeah, let's do that. And then while folks are raising their hands, I'm going to take a look through here on these written questions to see if there are any that we haven't addressed. Sorry,
No,
questions
Shane.
in the comments. Alfonso, while I'm doing that, do you want to call on people based off of hands raised?
Yeah, I'll look through.
While we're waiting on that, I see a question in the chat. How often will the voters elect a county executive? So the county executive has a term of 4 years. So you're going to elect, so the election, like for mayor, for supervisors, every 4 years. One notable wrinkle is because of some kinks in state law that still have to be patched up, the county executive will not have term limits. So what that means is they could, as long as they keep getting reelected, they could serve as forever. Well, as long as they're alive. In comparison, the Board of Supervisors, right, has a term limit of 3 terms of 4 years, and so can a person can only serve as supervisor for a maximum of 12 years. Do we have any hands raised? Otherwise, we can keep going through some of these written questions.
There's no hands up right now.
Okay, then I'll keep going through these written questions in order. What are some of the advantages and benefits of the new governance structure? Well, that is a huge discussion, and I think there's not a single right or wrong answer, and people are going to have different opinions, right? Voters clearly had a range of different opinions, because I think I should remember off the top of my head, I think it was the margin for passing Measure G was a little less than 52, just under 52%. So clearly there are a lot of folks who voted no, who didn't think this would be a better new governance structure. This is not, the voters passed it. It's the law. It's the will of the voters. So for our purposes tonight, the bigger question is, now that this is happening, how can we push that in the right direction and make sure it addresses the concerns that community brings to us? And that's part of our goal tonight, is to share that with you. We addressed the question of how members of the GRTF were selected, as I also addressed the recommendations of GRTF are not binding on the Board of Supervisors. They're ultimately advisory, so the Board of Supervisors can amend it. The board has not made any significant amendments to the recommendations that have come in so far. That we've tried to, the board, has, out of respect for the amount of time that the task force has spent on it, and as long as they keep doing community engagement, really thoughtful discussion, right, and there aren't any obvious legal or ethical principle problems with the recommendations, so far the board has tried to defer to the task force and not make huge amendments, but the task force recommendations are not binding. How do you recommend, where are you getting the pool for selection appointments? I think this is maybe asking both about the original task force and the ethics commission. Both of those were open, for some of the seats at least, were open for public application. So you would want to make sure, if you didn't hear about those, you'd want to make sure you sign up for the newsletter from the executive office of the board. It's a confusing name because we also have the chief executive office, CEO, which is not who's not related, who's not running this. It's the EO. Their logo is a big old EO, and that's maybe a follow-up email for us to include in our follow-up email on how to sign up. But that's where you'd hear about announcements for task forces, commissions, committees, and things like that. Then now we go to the question, why do we need 9 supervisors if there's going to be a county executive? Again, that goes back to this discussion about, that earlier question, what are the benefits and disadvantages of the new structure? That is our new structure now, right? Unless the voters come back and say, we changed our minds, we're going to have a different one. The goal of expanding the board, which predated the discussion about the county executive, was recognizing that, the supervisorial districts are huge, right? 2 million people, right? So each supervisor represents more people than governors of most states in the United States, just to put that in perspective. And actually, I learned this fun fact over the weekend. It's fun for me, maybe not fun for anyone else who's a government nerd. In terms of the ratio of the number of people that a supervisor represents, that ratio is of 1 to 2 million is the lowest. In other words, supervisors have the largest districts of any government person anywhere in the world of a legislature, except for one, which is somewhere in India, which we don't have to get into. So why do we need 9? I guess let me rephrase it to what is the benefit of 9 when people talk about expanding it? It's to try to improve representation by lowering that ratio and having smaller districts with the thought that then the supervisor will be more responsive to, fewer people, they can be more responsive. That's with expanding it alone. Now that we've created a county executive, it introduces this big question that we raised earlier in the meeting, which is, okay, on the one hand, your supervisor is a smaller district. In theory, they have more bandwidth to pay attention to you specifically because now you're only one of only 1 million as opposed to 2 million. It's cut in half. That's all fine and good, but now that a county executive is going to take over the day-to-day actual operations that affect you, and your supervisor, who's now closer to you, is only doing legislation and policy. Meanwhile, for your day-to-day operations, you're now one of 10 plus million. Is that better or worse? That's an open question. And part of our overall effort tonight is to engage you all and more folks in the process so that the task force hears those concerns and that the ultimate structure addresses that tension, which is, okay, now on the one hand, you have a supervisor who's closer to you, and now you have this county executive who's further away from you, who's also in charge of day-to-day stuff. How do we make sure that that person, that county executive, is actually accountable and responsive to you all? Other questions? You can either raise your hand or drop it in the chat. Going back through, I think Carla collected all of our written questions. If there are no questions at this moment, we can go through the last couple slides and then come back to questions if folks think of more. So now pass.
Perfect. So what are ways to stay engaged with Team Metros? Something that the supervisor has made it a priority is that a unincorporated team and the constituent service team is to be out in the community, but also work in co-governance together. We have our Let's Chat for a Second, where we did our first phase and gather information about issues that are pertaining to every unincorporated area. We met with variety. We met with unincorporated community leaders. We identified folks that are interested in moving forward and making change and improving our communities. And the supervisor likes to say she wants to leave the district better than when she got into power. Our next part of the Let's Chat is we're focusing on understanding co-governance, but also what LA County governance is in more details. We give you a quick synopsis of the changes that are coming in, but also in the beginning, I talked a little bit about the county structure, what is the county, but we'll go in more details with this. These trainings are happening in late August. We are gonna add some of the conversations around Measure G in there. So we do want you to sign up. Please sign up here with this. If you sign up with the QR code, we'll also send the link. If not, also our newsletter. We pass out information and give the dates of those. So that's where we're asking you right now is to get involved with us, with our Let's Chat, with our building of our unincorporated community leaders to improve the second district. Next slide. Okay. And how to stay connected with us. This is the last slide. You could go to our website, our social media handles, both for Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, and then you can always email us. I will also add my email on the chat if you have any questions. We're focusing right now on our incorporated communities and making sure that they are activated for GRTF, but also we build our community UA leadership for the future. Yes, can you send the link here? Yeah, we'll put it right now. But if you have any questions, we'll stay on. You could unmute yourself or raise your hand.
Well, let's have folks raise their hand and let's call on them just so we don't have a whole, but no one's banging down the door. So let's see. Any other questions folks have? All right. Alfonso, I think going once,
Yeah.
going twice, going three times. If
Oh wait, we have
oh,
one.
we
We
got
have
a
one. We
hand.
have
All
one.
right, Byron. All right.
Quick question, just because I hadn't thought about this.
Yeah.
So in terms of like the the executive having 10 million people, I know right now we don't have enough people for committees per se. So similar to the city of Los Angeles, would having departments that report to like a chair of a committee or the different committees, would that help mitigate something like that, wherein like the board of supervisor office will be more have more power in terms of the day-to-day operations if X X department reports to a committee or expanding the cluster process, what would that look like to help mitigate the 1 to 10 million ratio?
Yeah. So let me unpack that because there's a lot in there, and I think you can draw, and I think you're drawing from the city of Los Angeles example. I think is what you're talking about. So let's start with the committee piece on the board side. So right now, because of a state law called the Brown Act. Sorry, let me back up even further. In a lot of legislatures, you have committees, right? If you've ever followed the California legislature, city council, Congress, when someone comes up with an idea for a bill, right, for legislation, it usually goes to a committee, right, with different subject matter. This is a committee on judiciary. This is a committee on environment. This is a committee on health services. And that subgroup of the legislature, because it's going to be a subset, a smaller number, who focus on health issues, are going to talk about it first. And then the committee usually then decides whether or not, okay, we've made amendments, we like this idea, we're going to send it to the full legislature. And so, in order to go from idea to an actual law, you pass through committee and then you go to the whole council, legislature, Congress, assembly, etc. Because of the Brown Act, sorry, state law called the Brown Act, and because we only have 5 supervisors, we can't have a quote unquote, we can't have a committee of more than 2 supervisors. So most counties don't have a committee structure because the numbers are a little bit too small, right? Like, state legislature, you're like, okay, the 8 of us on the or the 8 or 10 of us on this committee are going to submit it to the body of 80. That's okay. Or city council, they have, uh-oh, putting me on the spot here while we're recording. I think they have usually around like 3 council members, right? So for the board too, it doesn't really happen. But once the board goes to 9, yeah, you could imagine committees of like 3 members, right? That would then vet things. But that's an open question if we'll even have committees. So that's just what the committee question is, right? About whether we'll have them, what they would do. To then Byron's specific question, so in the city of LA, uh, there are committees, right? And committees with different subject matter areas. And there is a informal but strong relationship between the chairs who oversee a department's issues, the committee for so the chair of I'm going to make up the committee names because I don't the transportation committee, LADOT, the LA Department of Transportation. They talk more to the chair of the transportation committee because that committee is going to have the first bite at any council issues that deal with the Department of Transportation, usually. And so that chair has a bit of extra relationship, leverage, ability on the council side to try to get that department head to do something. Because otherwise, the department head, analogous to our structure, reports to the mayor, does not directly report to the council member. In our version, once we have an county executive, would not directly report to the supervisor anymore, the way that the department heads currently do. So Byron's question, having explained all that, is like, could we have a structure like that? Would that help deal with the issue of, hey, the county executive is elected countywide, and now if I'm a constituent, I'm one of 10 million. One, that's innate. That's definitely an idea for serious, like an idea for consideration and something to definitely uplift. And the task force, I'm sure, is thinking. I know that they are thinking about committees and as one of many possible details to flesh out to try to answer these questions. Would that solve the problem? That's a bigger question to debate. It's a big part of how big thing that's unique here is what I just described about the city of LA and like any number of these other systems where there's checks and balances and separate judiciary and legislative, is that those relationships have been built up over 100+ years, right? Because from the moment the city was founded, it had a council and a mayor, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas here, we've had a board for 150 years, and now we're going to split that apart And nobody knows exactly what that's going to look like because that's a whole brand new development. So, anyways, that's a long answer to Byron's question. Other questions?
We have
Sorry,
one more hand.
sorry. This is Isela. Can I just add something for the whole group on that one? Thank you, Byron, for bringing that up. I think one of the things sorry, I'm Isela Graciana. I also am part of Team Mitchell. And one of the things that I would hope for those of you that have joined that can walk away from this conversation is how you can contribute to the ideas and how you can contribute to influencing and impacting what the advisory committee is going to recommend to the board. So Byron, what you're raising, as Jonathan said, can be an idea. The piece of whether it'd be better or not, or what would be better. I think what it's helpful here is to think through your experiences with county municipal services, with county services overall, with other government bodies, that if you could think of like, you know what, this city, this entity has had a solid process of engaging residents and responding to the concerns. Think about it that way. So if in other bodies having department heads participate in committees, if committee structure ends up in this, or maybe if it doesn't, if there's another way to have department heads, that is something that we would encourage you to share with the advisory committee. So the intention of today's conversation is to really provide you with the information, with the tools for you to be able to participate and provide input into that. So thank you, Byron, for raising that. That's a great example of a thought of like how structurally what could be added to potentially help with some of the challenges or issues of representation in having municipal services. So thank you. Just wanted to highlight that for the group.
Thank you, team.
Thank you, Isela. Adding to that, we are having an August 8th meeting in person. We will send out the details soon, and that's where we're going to expand more on this conversation. And with the question Byron you mentioned and Isela expanding and Jonathan's information he gave, we're going to expand that out a little bit more. Do not see any more questions unless team, do you see anything? And that concludes. Thank you all for coming.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.